The Association of American Medical Colleges is pleased to welcome you to this evening's webinar, From Bystander to Upstander, Advocacy in Action. My name is Jennifer, and it's my pleasure to facilitate. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us. Please note we are recording, and we will make the archive available in about a week. We did mute all participant audio and video. If you need help, please email aamc@compartners.com. The presentation will last up to 90 minutes and does include time for questions and answers. You may submit your question at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. During Q&A, our presenter will answer as many questions as time allows. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Adam Thompson-Harvey. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's a very exciting webinar that we have for you. My name is Dr. Adam Thompson-Harvey. I'm a fourth-year ear, nose, and throat resident at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I sit on the administrative board for the organization of resident representatives, as well as a liaison to the GDI committee. The ORR started some subgroups 2 years ago, and they focused on different key priorities, one of them being equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the whole part of that was to further engage constituents in these particular matters. For the equity, diversity, and inclusion subgroup, we focused on identifying and addressing structural and interpersonal expressions of racism that afflict healthcare, and whether it's manifested as social determinants of health, policies that create health disparity, or diagnostic algorithms that bias treatment decisions or practices around admission, hiring, advancement, and leadership. As well as we wanted to really focus on supporting initiatives that dealt with anti-racism, equity, diversion, and inclusion, and particularly in collaboration with the GDI. This webinar is one out of the many points of engagement with GDI, the AAMC, as well as all of those involved in academic medicine. At this point, I'll introduce our facilitator for tonight, Dr. Dale Hodge. Dr. Hodge is a third-year anesthesiology resident at the Oregon Health and Science University. Hailing from Buffalo, New York, he attended the University of Buffalo, where he earned his undergraduate degree in aerospace and mechanical engineering with a French language and lit minor. And he also did obtain a master's degree in mechanical engineering and focused on hemodynamics and vascular biomechanics. He later worked in the industry and later on obtained his MD and PhD from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in Bronx, New York, and did further research focusing on stem cells and breast cancer metastasis. He is currently a chief resident in OSU's Oregon Scholars Program, particularly in the research track, where he is conducting tissue engineering research. A lot of engineering from this guy. Among Dale's many accomplishments, he is a member of Alpha Omega Alpha, the Honor Society for Medical School, and it has a keen interest in the social determinants of health, especially as it pertains to underrepresented and marginalized communities. His presentations have included health problems in urban communities, which provided a data-driven historical examination of environmental, legislative, and social policies and their impact on quality of life and life expectancy in marginalized communities. So at this time, I'd like to bring Dr. Hodge for moderation and thank him for his help in facilitating this webinar this evening.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dale Hodge. I'm a third-year resident and research chief resident in the Department of Anesthesiology and Perioperative Medicine at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Kimberly Manning. Dr. Manning is a native of Los Angeles, California. She completed her pre-medical studies at Tuskegee University in Alabama and received her medical degree from Meharry Medical College in Tennessee, both historically Black colleges and universities. She then completed her residency training in internal medicine and pediatrics at Case Western Reserve University, where she served as chief resident and was chosen by the medical students of Case Western for honorary membership into the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society. She serves currently as a professor of medicine and associate chair of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the Department of Medicine at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Manning is a very accomplished clinician educator, having received numerous teaching awards, including the ACGME Parker J. Palmer Courage to Teach Award, which honors program directors who find innovative ways to teach residents while providing quality healthcare in the same setting. I can go on and on about the many distinctions and honors that Dr. Manning has earned over the course of her career, but I'd like to shift the focus to Dr. Manning's presentation for this evening, From Bystander to Upstander, Advocacy in Action. This presentation is particularly important to provide the audience with the tools necessary to become more culturally competent and savvy members of the healthcare workforce. In the past several years, there's been a gradual realization as to how our society perpetuates systemic inequalities in a number of domains, including healthcare. These range from realizing the inherent bias of clinical standards like EGFR, which can delay certain populations from receiving kidney transplants, to focusing on the underestimation of pain in certain pregnant populations, which can make them more likely to die during childbirth. While these clinical scenarios have clear objective endpoints, there are some metrics that are more difficult to measure, namely how we speak and how we act. Dr. Manning will explain how the lens through which we perceive the world can have profound effects on our patients and our colleagues. The fact of the matter is that we all have some sort of bias, and we have all let that bias detrimentally affect our relationships around us, whether it's misgendering an individual, mistaking the role of a member on a medical team, or witnessing microaggressions. All of us have either witnessed or committed these acts. And more importantly, all of us will continue to witness and commit these acts. Nobody is perfect. We're all human. However, understanding how to mitigate these circumstances is an important part of medical training. This is a very challenging topic, especially for trainees who are developing their clinical acumen in the setting of a fundamental cultural shift. Integrating the knowledge that Dr. Manning will present tonight into our personal practice will hopefully provide us with many valuable tools that will help us to address the effects of systemic bias, to help us become better advocates for those around us, to help us all shift from being bystanders to upstanders. Now, it's my great honor to introduce our distinguished guest, Dr. Kimberly Manning.
Thank you so much. And I just want to get a thumbs up from you, Dale, that you can hear me fine. Awesome, awesome. That was such a great introduction. I'm so glad you provided us with some context as to why we're talking about this important topic. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. And I'll be talking to you today about how to move from being a bystander to an upstander. And I'll just start by saying, the reason why I even started thinking about this topic and prepared even a presentation about it is because I will find myself in these situations where I would learn about my own biases or talk about implicit bias, but will be left with this moral distress and not knowing what to do next. What was the action part of it? How can I do better and how can I move forward? And so that's what we'll be talking about, really giving you those tools. I have no disclosures, but I do have two disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that I'm in my home and I'm a mother. And so as lives of mothers can be, hopefully nobody yells out or does anything to disrupt this talk. But my second disclaimer is that 365 days per year, every single day of every single year, I cry at least once. I've already gotten in a cry for today, so I don't anticipate that will happen tonight. But in the event that it does, I do believe we should normalize emotion. And sometimes having these conversations can be emotional. I start every lecture that I give with gratitude because sometimes we forget to offer gratitude. And these are the faces of some recent graduates of the Emory University School of Medicine. And what you can see in this picture is that many of them look like me. And I have to admit that that has created an urgency for me in many ways. As I think about the students who I work with and trainees like you and others, it's really important that we do this work. I also think connectedness is something very important for us to think about. Many of you are probably familiar with Dr. Valencia Walker. This is us actually at the GDI meeting pre-pandemic. And that was the day we met. But since then have become very good friends and have really supported each other through some very challenging times for those who work in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice fields. Moreover, I think it's important for us always to consider the power of mistakes. We are all biased, as Adele told us already, and understanding that we are all biased, we will mess up. We will say the wrong thing. So these discussions about microaggressions, micro-invalidations, micro-insults, they are not just limited to certain people. We all commit them, whether we realize it or not. But with that comes growth. And if you're lucky, a growth mindset, which pushes you to always think of ways to be better, to grow, to show and prove, if we were to use the lingo of the culture. And I think that's an important thing for us to be thinking about, and that takes courage. Putting a mirror on yourself and hoping to do better and be better, and also speaking up is something that sometimes we have to work towards. And I've already mentioned the growth mindset, which is something I think we all can use in this time. So we're at the very end of Black History Month, and I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to offer you a piece of Black history. This woman is a woman by the name of Janice Lee. Dr. Lee was the first African-American woman in the Department of Medicine at Emory to achieve the rank of full professor. That was in 2009. She was followed by Dr. Jada Bussey Jones, who happens to be my mentor, and she became full professor in 2013, followed by Dr. Stacy Higgins in the Department of Medicine in 2017, Dr. Jennifer Christie in 2019, and hallelujah, me in 2020. Now, the significance of this is really this number, 38,975, which according to the AAMC, as of about 2019, accounted for the number of individuals at US medical schools who have achieved the rank of full professor. Now, of that number, 307 identify as Black women. 307 out of 38,975. See, and I know what Dale is doing right now because he's an engineer. Dale is already trying to calculate the percentage. So I'm gonna just speed it up for you and show you. That's not such a great number, 0.7% out of all of the full professors at US medical schools. And that was just a couple years ago. So we have some work to do. And so when you start to ask yourself questions like, why does this happen? Maybe sometimes the environment that we are in stops us in our tracks and causes us to fall out of the pipeline. I'm a storyteller at heart, and so I'll start with a story. This is a medical student that I was advising at the Emory University School of Medicine was rotating on her surgery rotation. And on this particular day, the team was rounding and everybody had on the same hospital issue scrubs. Everybody had the blue scrubs on that you get out of the pack. That say Emory down the side that you're not supposed to wear out of the hospital. The students have on the short white coats with fat pockets packed with all the, toilet, the rolls of gauze and trauma shears and such. And they approached the bedside of this patient who was post-op. And not really anything too exciting there. But as they approached the bedside, this team made up of 2 medical students, 2 residents, a senior resident, and an attending, all in scrubs, all dressed alike. The patient takes her tray, which was filled with food, pushes it toward my student, one of the students, and says, "Sweetie, I really wasn't hungry. You can take this away." It was also very cold, and covers up the tray and hands it to my student. And she looks at the woman and says, "Oh, I'm a medical student on the team. I'm actually not from food services." At which point the woman sort of shrugged and kind of went back to what she was doing. But it's not so much the fact that that person mistook her for a member of the food services team, which, to be clear, there's nothing wrong about that essential role. But the fact is that she did not think that this particular student could be a part of the healthcare team. And the hardest part for that student, who ultimately called me from a stairwell crying, wasn't that someone mistook her for a member of the food services team, but that nobody did anything. Nobody on her team stepped in for her. Nobody, when they got out in the hallway, said, "Hey, that shouldn't have happened," or "Are you all right?" What they did when they got out of the room is said, "Okay, who we got next? Who's up next?" And that was it. And the only difference between this student and anybody else on the team is that she had her hair in braids, she had a brown face, and she was of African descent. And that was it. And you may ask yourself, okay, come on. This was an older patient who did not have racial concordance with that student. And this is the Southern United States, and this is Georgia. Maybe that woman, had never seen a physician or a medical student that looked like my student, had never seen somebody who had braids in their hair and was, a part of the healthcare team in that way. So why should we walk on eggshells, right? Like every time somebody says something, must we walk on these eggshells and not, just say and do what we think if we don't mean any harm? Well, I want to give you this analogy. If you are standing outside, minding your own business, just being who you are, and I roll over your foot with my SUV, but I didn't see your foot, does that make it hurt any less? Now imagine if I always roll over your foot all the time, and I don't even get out to check on your foot or say anything. I mean, I could say, like, what is your foot doing there? Do I have to always be watching out for feet? Over time, repetitive injuries hurt and they impact people. And how do they impact us? What takes a medical student like this one in 1995 and stops her from ultimately becoming a full professor, one of the 38,975? Things like this. I would have thought you went somewhere other than an HBCU. You're so good. You could have gone anywhere you wanted. Did you want to go to Meharry? Where's the doctor? You're super articulate. Wow. I spoke to your supervisor already. All of that leads to amplifying the imposter syndrome, which Lord knows I felt as a resident, a medical student, and even still feel some to this day, and perhaps impacts the way we identify ourselves when it comes to the next steps we'll take, our willingness to take on leadership roles, and our ability to imagine ourselves as full professors at institutions that historically did not include us. So my objectives for y'all this evening are pretty straightforward. One, we're going to talk about what it means to be an upstander and a little bit about bystander. Talk about when we should even be thinking about stepping up for each other. Why we should do it. We already heard a little bit about why, right? Because things that interrupt the way that you see yourself or imagine yourself as a part of the healthcare team and the system can impact your ability to reach your full potential. But especially when you are done with this, my hope is that you will have some concrete tools on how to act right in the moment when something happens that you can apply tomorrow when you go to work. So what does it mean to be a bystander? Well, bystander, by definition, is somebody who is present but not taking part in a situation or an event, like a chance spectator, right? But what I want to draw your attention to is something called the bystander effect. The bystander effect is this idea that when more people come around, the more people present when something happens, the less likely the individual is to act. For example, in my house, y'all, if it's a whole bunch of dishes in the sink and everybody's home, for some reason, everybody thinks somebody's going to do the dishes. But when one person is home alone, somehow the dishes get done because there's nobody there to do them, right? So when you are alone, if that patient collapses in front of you in the hallway, or you're the one person in the room when somebody loses a pulse, the chance of you engaging is much, much higher than it is when others are there, right? So as soon as others get present or around you, that number falls to 31%, right? So we've seen it, right? We've all stood around at the code and tried to figure out who was running the code. And that's called the bystander effect. So why do we stop in our tracks? There's four things I tend to think of. One is diffusion of responsibility. I mean, somebody else is going to do it. Like if we run to the code and somebody's an anesthesia resident, I might think, well, the anesthesia resident probably has run more codes than me, so they probably can do it, right? So we come up with these ideas of who's going to do it or who can do it. There's also ambiguity. I wonder if that student, that co-student who was beside my student, maybe she felt moral distress, but maybe when she looked around and saw that the student didn't look upset and that nobody was really doing anything, maybe she thought, maybe I shouldn't be upset. Is this a problem? Was that wrong? There's also the perceived cost, right? If you're attending, your senior resident, your chief resident, nobody said anything. Well, who am I as the medical student on the team or the intern on the team? Who am I to go saying something and creating this kerfuffle, right? And then there's apprehension. What if your personality is not the personality of somebody who immediately, confronts somebody? Maybe you don't like a confrontation. Maybe that's just not your personality at all. So sometimes these are the things that make us stop. But as we think about this, it may be more, right? Sometimes it's not just diffusion of responsibility. It's not just ambiguity. It's not perceived cost. And it's not this idea that maybe you just are too apprehensive to speak up. Sometimes you don't even see what happened, right? Something happened and you didn't even realize nothing went down because it didn't really involve the group that you're a part of, and your life lens had not put you in a space where you had to really regard this as a problem. So part of what shapes our biases and the way that we think are our life lenses and how we've grown up, right? So I'm gonna give you some examples to reflect upon. And what I wanna let you all know is that we will have time for discussion at the end of this. So please put those questions, those thoughts, those reflections into the comments, and we will get to tackle all of them. So I want to see if somebody can, let's see, Dale or anybody that can unmute themselves. Does anybody know who this person is? I shouldn't have called on Dale. That's not fair.
That isn't fair. No.
No, I'm not calling you out. That's not fair. So I will not call out anybody else. But let me say this. If you are my age, which Dale is not, and you went to a historically Black college like I did, and every time there was like spring break or something like this person you saw on stage. If you go to the Essence Festival every year, this person you've probably seen before. Now, this person here is an artist by the name of Meatloaf, who recently passed away. Now, I will tell you that when I started my internship in Cleveland, Ohio, turns out that I had never heard of Meatloaf before. And we started our internship off in these social events, which included this place called Howl at the Moon, where it was a dueling piano bar and they play songs and everybody would sing along with the songs. Now, mind you, I had gone to Tuskegee, I had gone to Meharry, I'm from Inglewood, California. I had never really been in any environment where anybody was listening to Meatloaf. However, I was doing okay for the start of this. I played some Elton John. I knew Elton John. I, played a little Billy Joel. I was rolling with that. But then they started playing this song by this artist, Meatloaf. And when I tell you every single person in that whole room knew the song, they stood on tables, they played air guitars, they sang every word. And I had never heard this in my whole life, not one time, not one even single note. And I may have heard it 2 times since that year, right? But that's because my life lens did not include that. My life lens included Frankie Beverly, the man on that first picture, right? Not Meatloaf. So I want to do another exercise with you, and I want you to just take a moment to take a look at this and just ask yourself these questions. How many of these names are very familiar to you? Garth Brooks, Taylor Swift, Terry Gross, James Taylor, Barbra Streisand, Ryan Gosling. Would you expect most people your age, or most people period, to at least have heard of these people? Now, I'll also ask you to think of how many of these names are very familiar to you. Kiki Shepard, Jill Scott, Nia Long, Charlie Wilson, Florida Evans, Elle DeBarge, Donny Hathaway. Now, it's possible that not one single name on this list rings a bell for you. You might be like, I have no idea who any of those people are, or I kind of know who one of the people is. Maybe. But your life lens shapes what's familiar to you, what is other to you. And that life lens may impact your ability to see what is okay and what is not okay, and to recognize when you ought to be stepping in. So I work at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, along with a whole lot of doctors who do not look like me, right? So my life lens includes a little bit of what you've already heard, but I'm a Black woman, a Black American woman. I'm married to a Black American man who happens to be an Army veteran. That kind of shapes my life lens. I have 2 sons who are now a little older than they were in this picture. So how I even think about things that happen in the news, that is impacted by my life lens as a mother. I'm a descendant of people who endured and survived slavery. And given that there's peculiarities in the lived experiences of Black Americans who are the descendants of those who were enslaved. I went to 2 historically Black colleges, as did my parents. That has shaped my life lens. My kids present themselves with Afrocentric hairstyles and looks, which can impact the way the world sees them. That shapes my life lens. This is one of my best friends, another physician who's a same gender loving Black man. And my day-to-day interactions with him, they shape the way that I engage with the LGBTQIA plus community, again, because he is a piece of my life lens. But I take all of that energy, all of those experiences, all these things shaping the way I see the world, right? And I bring them onto the wards, and I educate and influence medical students and residents, along with a whole lot of other people who have their own life lenses. Now, some people might see this image and they might think a few things. They might see this image and think somebody is mad and somebody's getting ready to fight, or something bad just happened, or I don't even know how to feel about this. I don't know what this is. Now, if you're me and you see this picture, if you have my life lens, you will see this image and you will feel warm and fuzzy inside. These are members of a historically Black fraternity called Omega Psi Phi fraternity. It is the fraternity that my daddy pledged in 1962 at Tuskegee, and that my husband pledged in 1992 at Virginia State University, right? And these gentlemen are at a historically Black college, and this is typical of what I would see at a homecoming. But because my life lens includes this, I immediately see this a particular way, which the rest of the world may not. Now, another exercise I'll ask you to do is just to take a look at this list. And if you have a piece of paper handy, do this, because this will help you see not only where some people lack privilege, but where you do lack privilege. So even if you come from a historically excluded group, you probably do have some privilege. So what are 3 things on this list that you always have to think about every day when you wake up, when you are walking around in a hospital, living your life? Do you have to think about a disability? Do you have to think about your gender expression? Do you have to think about your religious expression? What about your height? What about your weight? What about the way you talk? What about your name? How do people pronounce your name? The safety of your loved ones or yourself, how old you are. Now, what do you never have to think about? You don't ever have to think about the fact that, you know, what your sexual orientation is. You don't ever have to think about the way that you talk. You don't ever really think about your safety or your loved one's safety. You don't, right? So different groups of people have to think about different things. And for us to become better upstanders, right, we have to broaden our life lenses so that we can see more of what people are experiencing. So I asked you to pause and reflect for a moment on this, and hopefully you jotted down a few of those things that you do and don't have to think about every day. So why does this matter? It matters because your life lens is shaped by your individual exposures. So there's good news, right? We can do things to change our life lens or broaden our life lens. That's through being around diverse groups of people. If you're in homogenous environments all the time, your life lens is only going to include certain things. Even being with me, talking to you, even me sharing the things that I've shared with you about my background has slightly broadened your life lens, or maybe broadened it a lot. Bias training, right? Cultural humility, and that calls for us to assume we don't know everything. And there will be things that because of how we grew up and where we were exposed, we just don't know. And we have to be open to that. So life lenses help create our implicit biases. It shapes how we think of what's normal, what is other, who we protect, who we suspect, and what data we're willing to collect on people's behalf. So I want to show you a little bit about my own biases, just a 60-second snapshot. And I can show you better than I can tell you, right? So I spend part of my clinical time on the hospital service as a hospitalist, hybridized between hospital medicine and general primary care. And on this particular day, I was on the hospital service and I was down in the emergency department waiting for my team to come down so that I could staff a new admission. The emergency department was busy that day, and I was kind of standing right in the middle of all the action, right? And so I looked over to my right-hand side and I see this Black woman who appears to be elderly. She's got a blanket over her shoulders, looks like a Dora the Explorer blanket, honestly. And there was a little girl next to her with a hospital issue comb, combing her hair and singing a little song, right? I look straight forward and I see on a gurney a young white man who looks like a fairly new haircut. He had on the newest Jordans, and I know he did because my sons like Jordans. So I know just what those Jordans were. And he was holding a phone in his hand. It looked to be one of the newer iPhones, kind of scrolling through it. And I just look over at him for a moment, just keep moving. To my left-hand side, I see a couple sitting together. They're speaking softly in Spanish. I can see an AV graft on the man's forearm. The woman looks very, very worried. His ankles are swollen. All of a sudden, I hear this loud shrieking. I look over to my right, and there I see this woman screaming, her blonde hair pasted to the sides of her face, and she's sweating. Her blue eyes are bulging, and she's screaming, asking if I'm her doctor and yelling expletives in my direction. All of a sudden, I hear this cacophony of people shuffling in, and this young Black man comes in. His pants are kind of falling down. He looks to be about a little older than my oldest son, probably about 18. And his hands are tied behind his back with plastic ties, and they seem to be handling him roughly. He reminds me of my son. And then a nurse with a high BMI comes up to me, taps me on the shoulder, and asks me if I'm taking care of a particular patient, and if I can write an order for the patient who appeared to be psychotic. So without telling you how I felt in those moments, what I will tell you is that I was hungry, I was tired. And in those moments, that is when bias can often come out and show us a lot, right? So we have our biases that are explicit. Those are the things that I know I'm biased toward. So for example, that grandmother that was there with the Dora the Explorer blanket over her shoulders, I probably have an explicit bias toward her because she reminded me of my grandmother, right? But I want us to think a little bit about that implicit or unconscious bias, those things that are not in our conscious thoughts, based on social stereotypes. They may not even align with our upbringing, and they can affect our behaviors. They can be positive or they can be negative. So let's kind of walk through what that looks like. So if I say peanut butter, you're probably going to say jelly if we're talking about a sandwich, right? If you grew up in the United States, peanut butter and jelly go together. That's sort of a thing, an association, a quick association. So our system one thinking, that fast thinking, tells us those go together. That's how implicit bias works. It's mental shortcuts, which are necessary for our survival, right? We can't constantly use system two thinking for every single thing we do. It's an ordinary thing, it's unavoidable, and it's built from your life experiences. So if you did not grow up in the US, peanut butter and jelly may not make any sense at all to you, but it was originally a survival mechanism, right? If you were, out in the wild or in a cave somewhere, and an animal comes in your direction with teeth baring and snarling, after a while you come to realize that that's dangerous and you ought to run, right? And it may not align with your explicit values or feelings, and it can have a negative or a positive impact depending upon what the issue is. So for example, if you have been taught to associate white hair, right, with an aging person, so a woman with white hair, you think somebody's grandmother or somebody aging, but you won't always be right. Sometimes it is a young woman who just decided that she wanted her hair to be white, or whose hair is white, right? So our ordinary mental shortcuts don't always work. Adding to our biases are the messages that we get, right? So these are screen captures. I didn't do anything to these. I screen captured a Google imaged happy people. And these images are what happy people look like. And what generates images to come up over and over again is it is affirmed through search engine optimization, right? Through however many people click it and accept that as the right thing, it moves things up higher and higher. So these are happy people. And this is what happy people look like. What about beautiful women? These are what beautiful women look like on a Google image. I didn't say beautiful white women. I didn't say beautiful Black women. I just had beautiful women. Poor people. I didn't say poor people of color. I just said poor people. And our images show us that this is what poor people look like. This is what the disenfranchised look like. These are and this starts to look other, right? And then you start to wonder, well, can I tell if I'm biased? What are my biases? So many of you have heard of Project Implicit, the IAT, Implicit Association Test. For some people, it has become a little controversial, but Millions of people have done these tests, and it's a great way through pattern recognition to determine what some of your biases may be. And when you finish taking the IAT, it reports out information comparing you to all of the other web respondents who answered those questions or did those associations. And so from there, you get a sense of where you lie, right? Are you a person who has a strong automatic preference for something, a moderate, or even a neutral or a mild automatic preference? So there are a few examples. There's white and black, young and old, thin and obese, attractive and unattractive, right? And I think it's even more impactful to just share my own biases, because I would like to tell you that, you know, as a Black American woman, like, oh yeah, you know, I've worked all of this out and I'm here to talk to you about your biases, but that's not really how it works, right? How it really works is us thinking a little more carefully about all of us having bias. So when I took the IAT, I had a moderate automatic preference for Black people over white people. That's not a shock given my life lens, right? My life lens was a predominantly Black and brown environment up until I was about 25 years old. So that makes sense. I was kind of surprised that I had a moderate automatic preference for straight people based on the IAT. I was also surprised, given the number of people in my family and loved ones who have higher BMIs, that I had a strong automatic preference for those who are thin or have a lower BMI. I had a moderate automatic preference for cisgender versus transgender. And again, my life lens does include trans people. But again, because of the things that I'm seeing and the messages that we get, that doesn't quite align with my values. I had a moderate to strong automatic preference for those who are younger. And this one, y'all, I'm telling you, I took this test 3 or 4 times. I went to sleep, I woke up, I tried to eat, I tried to have some coffee. I'm like, I'm gonna be able to beat this one. But over and over again, I had a moderate automatic preference for lighter skin versus darker skin, which really doesn't even align with my family. But again, those images, when I think about those Google images, these are the things that we see. So what does that mean? What it means, y'all, is that we are all tofu floating in the broth of this world and taking up all the flavor of it. So whether we like it or not, we are going to start to take up some of these attitudes, and it's going to shape those mental shortcuts, whether we like it or not. And remember, the bias affects who we protect, who we suspect, who we reject, and what data we are willing to collect on behalf of our patients and those around us. There's stuff you can do. Now, for your biases, you can, of course, find out what they are with an IAT. There's reflection exercises about your biases. The idea of perspective taking is very important. Thinking about what is it like to be this person, and what might I do differently? Empathy building, counter narrative exposure, being around people that are the opposite of whatever the stereotype is. Discretion elimination, things where it's more fair, right? So this is what we do with our search committees and the interview processes, but especially building new associations and being okay with awkward. I actually do this exercise with my students and residents where I tell you to take your phone out, and ask you to do this too. Take your cell phone out and go to your contact list that are your most frequently dialed contacts, or just scroll through your contacts and get a sense of how many people in your contacts look like you. If the vast majority of the people in your contact list are homogenous or like you, it means that probably you need to build some new associations to broaden your life lens further. Also, a big thing for us all to think about are, when are our biases most likely to come out? When are we most likely to say or do the right or wrong thing, right? And that's when you're on what I call a bias landmine, certain emotional states. So you tired, you wound up about something, you frustrated. If the rules on something are a little ambiguous, if you're doing something where you're going through the motions, kind of low effort cognitive processing, distractions, right? If you're really distracted, fatigued, hungry, rushing, or high pressure. So when I was standing down in that emergency department, y'all, it was about 11:50. I needed to drive across town to the Emory Medical School from Grady. I was hungry. I needed the student residents to hurry up and get down to the emergency department. And so this was a perfect time for my biases to come out. And there are things that we can do to sort of mitigate those biases. So here's an example. I was in the clinic one day and it was busy. It was like right before the lunch hour. A couple of residents were backed up. I'm signing out all the residents. I'm actually working with a colleague who, bless his heart, was working very slowly. So I was feeling overwhelmed by having to do a little bit more than I wanted to do. And one of our patient access representatives comes back and asks me, hey, Dr. Manning, this patient is late. Now, I said, who is the patient? And she gives me the name, which I'll give as Jonquarius Moore. Now, I decide in that moment that the name Jonquarius Moore is the name of somebody that's too young to be late. That's probably somebody like 30 years old. Why is Jonquarius late? This doesn't make any sense. So I turn to her and I say, they're 30 minutes late, and you know what? They're just going to have to reschedule. Now, I'm at a safety net hospital. We don't always get to every single patient right on time. So telling somebody they have to reschedule when they're resource limited is a tough thing, right? But I had been given this talk, and I realized in this moment that, oh my goodness, I'm on a biased landmine. I'm hungry, I'm rushed, I'm under pressure, I'm distracted. And I have based this decision upon the bias of me deciding that the name Jonquarius Moore belongs to somebody young, and as an effect of that, able to get here on time. So I get up and I walk up to the front to find out what was going on with Jonquarius Moore, who turns out is young, but it's somebody who had been in the Coumadin clinic waiting to see the anticoagulation doctors, who ended up having to wait for results, go over to get another test done, and finally had come here and had come to Grady by way of the Grady transportation. This was somebody, it really wasn't her fault. She needed to be seen. Now imagine if her name had been Willie Mae Campbell. And Willie Mae Campbell, and that's somebody's grandmama, and Willie Mae, whatever reason Willie Mae had for being late, it was a good reason. So things like being hungry or being rushed can cause us to say and do things that we really shouldn't do. And so you have to ask yourself, wait, what kind of bias landmine am I on? And then take a moment to modify what you do based upon that, right? Sometimes I'll come in, I'll look at the schedule, and I'll know what my biases are. And I'll say, I want to round on this patient first, because I know I'm the most fresh and I'm the least likely to have my biases come out. There's also microaggressions that I'm sure you all have heard of. Microaggressions come out in the form of what we call micro-invalidations. Those are where sort of people erase who you are or kind of other you and act like you don't exist. There's micro insults, which are a little bit more deliberate and a little bit more direct. Things like, oh, you're so articulate. Gosh, you know, where'd you go to medical school? Gosh, you really, really speak clear. Micro assaults can sometimes be a little bit more deliberate. And I say intention does not matter because intention doesn't matter in terms of the pain it inflicts. Of course, if you don't intend to hurt somebody, that matters. But the intention that you saying you didn't mean to do something doesn't mean that it didn't impact the person or hurt them. So I'm going to share this with you because, again, I think this does a better job explaining microaggressions than I can.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
Oh, you're so well spoken.
just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins' name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every damn day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
So pretty.
Can I touch it, please?
Please.
Can I please?
is annoying. That makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Okay. So how do we move from knowing about microaggressions, knowing about what it means to be a bystander, and all of these things that give us moral distress, right? And how do we transform and move into action? And this paper from 2020 in academic medicine looked at how do we take implicit bias in health professions and move to transformation. And they focused on something called the transformative learning theory. The transformative learning theory is not a new concept. It's been around since the 70s, but in application to implicit bias, I think is really relevant here. So it's how do we take those things we learn and move them to change? And so the transformative learning theory pushes us in a few ways. First, it begins with a disruption and a revised interpretation of how you think. So whatever you thought before, something shakes that up and makes you go, oh my goodness. So for example, the murder of Mr. George Floyd thrust many people into a revised interpretation of what was happening in the world, right? Next comes critical reflection, where you think about, oh my goodness, what happened, or what I've thought about this, how have I fit into this? There's dialogue, having conversation about it, and then ultimately change or action. Now, for those who are not really keen on this word microaggression, and I know a lot of people who aren't actually, they're like, it suggests that you intended to do something wrong or intended harm. I instead say, instead of thinking of it that way, think of it as a word that is disruptive, because anything that throws a speed breaker down and causes disruption can help us move to action. It can lead to that critical reflection, a revised interpretation, more dialogue, and ultimately action. So what we've gotten so far is, one, what's the bystander effect, right? We know that the bystander effect is what stops us in our tracks, makes us less likely to act, to do, to respond, to upstand in real time because somebody else is going to do it. We also talked about our varied life lenses. Everybody on this webinar comes from a different environment. And even if you share racial and gender concordance with me, it does not mean we have the same life lens, right? The power of our implicit bias. And for those of us who are caring for patients every day and who are impacting learners, those biases, they affect the way that we treat people, our learners, our patients, our interprofessional team members, and how we interact with the world. And then we talked about the transformative learning theory. How do we go from having that sort of disruption in how we thought of something to some critical reflection, to dialogue, and then ultimately action and change? So our job is to notice what happens, to evaluate the situation. Wait a minute, was this wrong? Is this okay? And then assume responsibility. That's moving beyond that bystander effect to do more, right? So originally, there was something called the 4D approach to upstanding, even a 3D approach to upstanding. And this was originally rooted in sexual misconduct experiences, but we've taken this and adapted it for all forms of upstanding in the space, particularly as it relates to microaggressions in anything that threatens an inclusive environment. So the first thing you can do is to be direct. If that's your personality, to confront somebody, you see something, you could be like, she's a medical student on the team. She's not a member of the food services team. And yeah, she's a member of a medical student on the team. So you could be direct. You can also distract. Sometimes if you have somebody saying something and it's escalating, you can move the subject somewhere else. This is often helpful when the person who's saying or doing something is a patient, or if it's something where someone's trying to be funny and it's escalating. You can, sometimes the act of distracting, it can throw down that speed breaker and actually make the person saying or doing the wrong thing realize, oh my goodness, let me revise what I'm doing. There's also delegation. I can go to another person and say, hey, I want to talk to you, Dr. Manning, about what happened with this student on our surgery clerkship. So to talk to another person. Delay is where you come back and check on the person who may have been the victim. Hey, I saw what happened and I really didn't know what to do in that moment. Are you okay? I know it didn't really feel good for the patient to assume that you were not a part of the medical team. I'm sorry that happened. How can I be of support? But the last D, which we have added a 50, is one that I think everyone can do. And I want you to imagine this as no matter what your personality is like, that this is something that you can do to be an upstander. And that is a display of discomfort. So sometimes some of the most hurtful things, especially if you've been on the opposite end of a microaggression, is this feeling like you've been gaslit. You start looking around and you waiting to see, like, did somebody else hear that? And nobody's doing anything. Everybody's just like chilling, right? That can be one of the most hurtful pieces of all. And in that example with my student was. So what does that display of discomfort look like, y'all? It can just be something as simple as looking side to side and not laughing at the joke. You want to get a little more dramatic with it, you can be like, say, what now? Did y'all just hear that? And if, you know, just depends on your personality. But for me, sometimes it's just as simple as me making eye contact with the person that it happened to let them know you are not by yourself. I saw that. That was not okay. And then coupled with delay, me coming back to check on you, especially depending upon where you are in the hierarchical structure, or if you being direct in real time could put the person in a fishbowl and make them feel worse. Sometimes this display of discomfort can go further than you think. So I'm gonna give you a few examples of things that I wish that I had the tools to upstand in, but these are all experiences that I had that now I know that I would have done something different by using the 5 Ds. There was somebody giving a lecture, standing at the front of the room. They were trying to plug up their computer. The computer interface wasn't working well. The images weren't coming up right because they had prepared it on an Apple computer and now they were projecting it from a PC computer. And the person who was mic'd kept saying, these computers are retarded. I'm so tired of these retarded PCs. Gosh, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm such a retard for doing this. I should have remembered this. There was a resident on my team in my clinic who had just run the Peachtree Road race. She was really excited. She was telling me about the race. And a member of our team right there in our clinic looked at her, and she wears hijab, and says, how do you run with that thing on your head? Do you just tear it off of your head? My head will be so hot. I don't know how you do, and I just don't know how you live in Georgia with that hot thing on your head. Like, kept referring to her religious expression as a hot thing on her head. A 6'4" medical student who was my advisee was standing in the medical school, and somebody who was a senior and esteemed person on the faculty looked at him and said, if I were you and I was as tall and good looking as you, I would not be in medical school going into debt. I would instead be somewhere making millions of dollars with the number 23 on my back. Ha ha ha. A young resident in our clinic was excited because he and his wife were expecting a baby. This would be their 3rd baby. He was originally from Utah. He was a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and he was just showing us pictures of the baby and was excited. And an attending looked over at him and said, holy cow, how many kids do you have? 1 million? You Mormons have so many kids. To which he said, no, I don't have 1 million. I have 3. And then a colleague who's Korean was wearing a mask early in the pandemic, and people kept joking with him. Are you patient 0? Are you from Wuhan? Don't cough on me. You're patient 0. And these were colleagues. So these are the things that happen to us all the time. And sometimes when it happens, you are just so stunned, or other people in the room are laughing. What can we do? How can we apply those 5 Ds in the situation, right? We should always show a display of discomfort, but we can be direct, we can distract, we can delay, we can delegate, right? So there are things that we can always do in those times. And now I want you to be thinking more about what you do. So just to recap again, everybody should display discomfort, make eye contact, don't laugh at the joke, look down, something that does not affirm what the person is saying. Be direct, in the moment intervention, firm, clear, concise. If you are somebody senior on the team or a leader, sometimes that is what you have to do. And also depending upon how egregious it is. Distraction shifts the focus. For some people, that doesn't feel as affirming, but over time, I've come to realize that sometimes a lot of attention put on a moment can make the person who's the victim feel worse. So sometimes distraction in the moment to just move the spotlight on is a good place to begin. Delegate, speak to somebody, document it, tell it, write it down, write the email, contact the program director, do something right away, because that is another way to upstand. And then the delay, check in later. And I want to let you know that you could do one of these or all of these, right? I can be direct as the attending, I can delegate, and I can still come back and check on you later, right? So we should be thinking about what we can do based upon the situation. Sometimes you will be the microaggressor. It's not always going to be just that, you witness somebody else do something. So this is little baby here reminds me of a moment where I said the wrong thing to a family. I swaddled a baby after a delivery, handed the baby to her mother and said, "Here's your little burrito." Well, the mother was a Mexican woman, and her husband just looked so stunned. The whole room looked stunned. I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to be offensive. But again, it's like that car rolling over somebody's foot, right? You still use the 5D approach. You acknowledge your error, you autocorrect if you can, you apologize without excuses, you acknowledge how the person may have felt, you shut up and listen, and you tell a trusted friend or colleague what you did, because that creates some accountability. And let me say that, remember, sometimes the people that you hurt may not even be the people you're talking directly to. It can be all the people in the room who heard it too. So keep that in mind. But you must commit to doing better and move on, because getting into a self-deprecating do loop, it does not serve you or serve your patients or colleagues. Now, sometimes the microaggressor is a patient. And the questions I like to ask are, how acute is the illness? Is this patient cognitively intact? What's my level on the team? Do I know our hospital policies about stuff like this? Is safety an issue? But still don't let it slide. You still are going to use the 5D approach, but recognize that if your patient has dementia, if there's something, if the patient is clinically unstable, in the moment, you may have to care for the patient. But remember, the Ds still include delay. Right? It still includes a display of discomfort. It still includes a distraction. So there are things in the moment with patients that we can do, and we shouldn't do just nothing. This was a time when I was in the hospital with my team, and a student on my team was explaining to a patient at my request how to use an incentive spirometer. The patient looks at my student, who was South Asian, and said, "Do you even speak English? Does this dude speak English? Dr. Manning, why you got this dude speaking to me?" And he used a few derogatory terms and kept saying that my student didn't speak English. Now, it just so happens that this student was from Pittsburgh. English was his first language. But even if it wasn't his first language, right? I've learned to be careful to even make that the correction. The bottom line is that this wasn't okay. This wasn't something okay for the patient to say. So as the attending physician in that moment, I chose direct, right? Because I wanted to be most affirming to the student, but I wanted to keep the spotlight moving. I let him know that this is a member of our team. It's unacceptable for you to say that. And he will be participating in this team as a member of the team that I trust. And I would like for him to listen on how to use the incentive spirometer. So as the attending physician, where I was on the hierarchical structure created an urgency for me to step up. And then after that, we stepped out in the hallway and we took a moment to acknowledge that this was a microaggression. This was not okay. And then after that, I delayed and spoke to the students some more. I went back also to the patient and talked to the patient some more about what happened. Turns out that patient ended up having the student paged so that he could personally apologize to the student. He said, "I shouldn't have said that. I was trying to be funny." And the student ended up taking care of that patient for the rest of the time in the hospital. And lastly, you don't always have to wait for somebody to stand up for you. Sometimes you can be an upstander for yourself. So this image that you see of me here, I had just been crying when I took this picture because I wanted to remember this moment. I had been a visiting professor at a prestigious institution. I had just given a grand rounds that day. I gave a lecture later, and I was at a dinner with about 30 people at the head of a table. And this dean looks over at me after, hearing my presentations and says, I'm really trying to recruit a more diverse faculty and more diverse students, but how can I find the ones that are going to be like you, the scrappy ones? I try to look at the HBCU students, but I'm just hoping to get the ones that are going to be like you, that won't be an academic risk, the ones that are going to be scrappy. So I took a moment to scan the table to try to see if I could find somebody displaying discomfort, someone who would be an ally or upstand for me in that way. And there was nothing. People just acted like nothing happened. Well, he dug in a little bit deeper and he said, I'm really like looking for like that diamond in the rough. How am I to know when I look at a student from, a place like Mahari or Tuskegee, mispronounced both of my schools. How am I gonna know that they're going to be like you are? And in that moment, I realized that I'm a whole grown full professor now, and you invited me here, so I can upstand for myself. And so I said, sir, I actually have never seen myself as a diamond in the rough. I've always been a diamond gleaming right out in the open. Tuskegee was my first choice. Meharry was my first choice. It is my privilege to come from those institutions. And I believe that the rough is really in the eye of the person looking. It was never me. Now, afterward, I stood next to the table, hoping somebody would come up to me after maybe, delay. Hey, I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry that person said that to you. But they didn't. I waited. People told me, have a safe trip back. And I walked back to the hotel room and I got in the elevator crying. And I took this picture of myself trying to have a brave face. And so when you ask yourself, why out of 38,975 full professors, why would only 307 of them look like me? Maybe it is moments like this that cause us to revise who we are. Because I started asking myself, do I belong here? Maybe I shouldn't have even been their visiting professor. Maybe I'm an imposter. So our job is to notice what happens, to evaluate the situation, but ultimately to assume responsibility. Because if it's not you, who is it going to be? And what could happen to that individual when they walk away? Thank goodness, thank goodness I have close colleagues, right, that I could call for support after that happened. But imagine if I didn't, and many people don't. So my takeaways are, you can be an upstander, no matter who you are. Notice, evaluate, and assume responsibility. And noticing can be hard, but you can do it. And the way to do it is through broadening your life lens and recognizing your own biases, because they're all things that we can do. Microaggressions are real, even if you don't feel them, and even if you didn't mean to do it, or if the person didn't mean to do it. And don't just remember the 4 Ds, remember the 5 Ds, including the one essential one, which is to always display discomfort. Let it be known, make eye contact, do something, anything to let the person get out of that lonely space of feeling like they're the only one who heard it. Acknowledge your own missteps, especially the more senior you get and the more of a leader you are. Let it be known that, you fall short too. And I think it's important for you all to know that, about me included. I know that you can stand up for yourself. You ain't always got to wait for somebody else to stand up for you. You can upstand for yourself. And my last pro tip is to be intentional about the learning and working climate. Because if that medical student had not had a positive learning and working climate with me, and if she didn't have my cell phone number, she wouldn't have been able to call me from that stairwell to tell me about what happened. She is now a faculty member at our medical school. She finished a fellowship. She's doing great and is very successful. And I believe will help us get past that number 307 to some higher numbers in the future. This is an everyone thing. This is really a sum of us thing, if you will. So this isn't just something to make life easier for people from historically excluded groups. When we upstand, we make the environment better for all of us. There's something in it for all of us, regardless of how we identify. So your homework is to make a list of those 3 perspectives that you do and don't have to consider, and think about what it would be like to have to think about whatever you haven't been thinking about. Then think about a time where you witnessed or committed a microaggression. What could you have done differently, right? Just like that list of those things that I witnessed. Now I know what I could have done differently, and I think about what I would do differently in the future. In closing, I just want to acknowledge that this kind of work, this work in diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, anti-racism, all the letters, right? Can't do it without support. This is my mentor, Jada Bussey Jones, but this is also the chair of medicine at Emory, who doesn't just talk about it. You know, he gives us the resources to be able to do this work, the protected time, the administrative support to do this work. And the people who benefit aren't just me. It's the people that we care for, the people that we are training so that we can deploy them out to be better upstanders too. These are our resident diversity council at Emory and Department of Medicine. So that, my friends, concludes my presentation. I am going to stop sharing here, and I look forward to hearing whatever questions you have and discussing further.
Dr. Manning, thank you so much for that incredible presentation. I haven't seen any questions in the chat box yet. If you are still in the audience, feel free to type them in the chat box and I'll convey them to Dr. Manning. One question that I have is, what do you think? I know everyone has their own personal threshold for when they should intervene. Should we all be striving to be more direct? And the reason why I asked that is because it feels like, yeah, you can get to a point where you can get to a point of not of diminishing returns, but if you keep being direct, there's only so much benefit you can get out of it, and it feels like it can potentially slow things down. The reason why I'm saying that is my own personal experience. I was in the neuro ICU one day, and I had a medical student with me, and I had a patient who is transgender male to female patient, and also Spanish speaking. So I had an interpreter who was on the phone who was trying to convey the information back and forth, and the interpreter kept misgendering. Back and forth, and I corrected at one point, but it was just slowing things down, and I had to get through rounds. And I felt like the medical student who was with me understood, you know, there was an issue, but like I felt like I couldn't keep keep correcting the misgendering. And then eventually when it came back in full rounds, I made a point to the medical student on the side, but it just felt like that wasn't the right time to keep doing it. And
and for my knowledge, was the patient the trans woman?
That's correct. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. And the student was a witness.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So I feel like I had a duty to help instruct the student and also advocate for the patient, but just the press of time and wanting to get through rounds and having to present to my team, I felt like I didn't do that good of a job. And I could have been more direct, but I sort of delayed because just of the time constraints. But my question is, do you think being more direct more often will help sort of shift the needle, or is it still sort of context dependent?
Okay, so what I think in that situation is that direct, because it could be that interpreter, their life plans did not include trans women or men, right? So direct would be, you keep saying this patient goes by she, her pronouns. So in referring to her, can you just make sure you're saying her? I mean, that's direct, right? That's not like that's not throwing shade at you, but trying to just say the correction. Sometimes people don't catch it. They just don't. Because the way that bias works, what they are seeing or hearing to them might say the wrong gender, right? And let me say this too, in me upstanding, right? There are things that every day I learn new. So one of the images I had in this talk was with one of my former mentees, a trans woman by the name of Holly. And I remember I was talking about a patient, and I actually said, believe it or not, Dale, what you said, I said transgender male to female. And she quickly corrected me and said, just say trans woman or trans woman, female. What that suggests is that this person had a different gender assigned at birth. You don't need to say one to the other. And I didn't know that. So this was a moment for somebody to upstand for me too. So even when we are in the process of upstanding, we still have things to learn, right? So I would just, I would probably have just made the correction directly to the person to stop them from doing it over and over again, because they probably weren't catching it. And this doesn't take as much time as you think. I think there's urgency there, because if you're a patient and you're in a vulnerable state, repetitively being misgendered and watching this dynamic of somebody trying to correct the person, that could actually be even more humiliating. Now, the other thing about direct, though, is that sometimes it does put people, the spotlight further on people. And I know of people who do not want that. They don't want you to, like, you know, beat on your chest and start to make a big deal about something. So, you know, I think part of our job is to just pay attention and to see, I'll try to watch the look on somebody's face and see what they're, where they might be in this, and whether or not I need to do more or less. And it's not always going to be perfect, but I can tell you it's better than nothing.
Thank you. So I have a question here from Amina Farouk.
Okay.
Their question is, during my time at Grady as a Morehouse intern, I learned a lot about the negative history between local institutions and how the history influenced the lens by which residents from different institutions interact with each other. What is your advice when it comes to addressing generational trauma at an institutional level, i.e. racism at PWI's academic hospitals?
Yeah, so I think, thank you so much, Amina, for that great question. I think one part of it is just going to be leaders have to be thoughtful about what they're perpetuating. So, you know, again, I do think the direct is important sometimes if I'm in a leadership role. So, for example, if I say, this patient was on the Morehouse service. Or if somebody says, oh, this patient was on Morehouse's service, I might say, tell me what you mean by that, because the way you said that, I don't know if I caught, tell me why you said it that way. Oh, you know how Morehouse is. I went to Meharry, so no, I think, and I might pull the person aside later and say, based upon, you know, when you say that, people could misunderstand you and think that you are suggesting that people who work at Emory and people who work at Morehouse don't have the same opportunity to be competent as physicians. And I don't think that that's something that's very becoming of you. So I might not call them out in front of everybody, but might bring it up. But also perspective taking, we talked about this, and also exposure. So, you know, just like people think they might have an idea of a certain group of people, most of the time it's because their life lens hasn't included them. Most of the people that you saw in Grady Hospital saying the most negative things about Morehouse residents and medical students, they had never been around anybody from those schools. And I love to just tell them, oh, I went to Meharry. I used to experience this between Meharry and Vanderbilt all the time. I think, you know, so I think repetitive exposure. So now we do like joint conferences and we do more things together so that people can get a better sense of who we all are.
Thank you. I have another question from I apologize if I messed name, Priyanka Ben Patel. Very right. I'm currently in a gap year preparing my med school application. Social justice is very important to me. Would you happen to know a good way to find which medical schools value social justice and equity as much as I do? Sorry, this is not directly connected, but I feel it's like a good important. I feel like this is an important to learn and important to how I learn, grow, and help.
Oh, yeah, I don't mind that question at all, Priyanka Ben. What I would say is, fortunately now it's so easy just to Google what you care about next to the institution. So let's say if you're thinking about coming to New York City, you type in New York City medical schools, or name schools in New York, name a school in New York City, and then type in justice, social determinants, health equity, and see what information that you get. You can also type in health equity medical schools, and then you will probably get programs that that bend toward social justice and health equity. Fortunately, in the time that we're in now, that's a lot of places. Some places do it better than others. Places whose mission includes serving the underserved tend to be places where that's great. In places in large metropolitan cities, it's good to figure out who is the patient population that they serve. If there is a safety net hospital connected to the training program, that's probably a place where you're going to find a focus on health equity, social justice, and fighting the social determinants of health.
And that being said, I have to give a shout out to my alma mater in the Bronx, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, which does exactly that. That's where I got a lot of my training in terms of social justice.
Emory.
And Emory, of course.
But also there are many, and I know that there's so many great places. I think any major metropolitan city, the only thing to watch out for is that if it's in a major city, it may, some schools do not serve the underserved population in certain cities. And you may get to a city that has a largely underserved population, but that is not who, your school is not who takes care of them. So you do need to kind of explore who is the patient population. And I do know that Einstein is serving the underserved population in the Bronx. So shout out to y'all.
Next question is from Robert Jones. How do you navigate the patients who are, quote, altered, i.e. dementia, delirium, substance use? I struggle with how to reconcile that the aggressor may not be acting or behaving if not be acting or behaving if not the underlying condition. How should you alter the, quote, 5D approach?
You don't, Robert. I tend to use distract. I don't, if somebody has cognitive impairment or if there's if they're psychotic or something like that, I'm not about to be in a situation where I'm calling them out or even calling them in. I'm just going to try to move the spotlight off of them. I will absolutely, when I get out of the room with my team, debrief in the moment. This just happened to me like a few weeks ago. We were in a room with this patient, an 86-year-old man who had grown up in Georgia, who happened to be white. He had cognitive impairment. And when I walked in the room, he looked at me and was like, I know a lot of people don't want a colored doctor, but I don't have no problem with coloreds. And you know what? If you colored, it's okay with me. And you know what? And then he looked at my intern who is East Asian and it's like, and you know what? As far as Chinese people go, I don't care nothing about the fact that you brought COVID here. I don't care about it. He said all this stuff. And I just moved him off the subject. I said, sir, I'm gonna need you to sit up so we can listen to your lungs. And every time he would say something, I would just redirect him to something else. As soon as we got out of the room though, we unpacked what happened. And again, this patient was not alert to person, place, or time. He was alert to race, I guess, but he wasn't alert to much else. So again, just to move things along, do what was essential in that moment. But I spent more of my energy debriefing with my team to support them.
This next question is from Stephanie Durheimer, who asks, what are ways to diversify your contacts in a very homogeneous area, Oregon, without engaging in tokenizing?
Oh, Stephanie, that is such a good question. You know what? I will tell you that I'm a big fan of social media. And I do think social media has absolutely transformed my contacts, because my contacts, again, were pretty homogenous too, with the exception of people that I work with. I mean, it was pretty much people who went to Tuskegee, Meharry, and my sorority, stuff like that, right? So I actually found that when I started being very intentional and mission driven on my use of social media and which affinity groups I joined in my professional organizations, I started to come in contact with different people with different ideas. And I started following people who have ideas that I wish to learn more about. And then over time, some of those people I befriended. So I think just opening yourself up to different types of people is a great place to start. I know Oregon can be pretty homogenous, but I know some people in Oregon who are not white heteronormative folk. So I think the key is just to open yourself up to it. And I know for me, for years, I would kind of separate people into, these are people that I work with, and I couldn't imagine them as a friend. And these are the people over here that I'm comfortable with. those are things that I do. And I also say, don't be a cultural ball hog. If you come into a space and it's 5 white people and 1 Black person, and all of y'all are talking about things that absolutely center around white culture, you may want to give space for people to talk about more things. So I found that was the loneliest piece of residency for me, that I was constantly in these spaces where culturally I needed to tone myself down because that wasn't the thing that anybody wanted to talk about or center on.
Our next question is from Stephen Robinson. As a senior leader, how do you maximize the willingness of those reporting to you to be comfortable to correct you?
So I lay that out in my expectations. Stephen or Stephen, I hopefully I got your name right, Dr. Robinson. At the very beginning of the month, I tell my team that I'm biased and that I'm working through it, and that I'm a person who's actually spread really thin. I give a lot of talks. I have teenage sons. There are a lot of things that stress me out and put me on biased landmines on the regular. And I need your help to help me be my best doctor, because my goal is to take excellent care of these patients with your help. I can't do that if the climate we're working in doesn't feel safe and inclusive. So I'm gonna need you to call me out. And then I bring up I give an example of something I said that just wasn't cool and how somebody called me out. The first time I gave this talk, y'all, true story, gave this talk, and I said, the slide that has things you have to think about and don't, I had sexual preference listed. And when my talk ended, somebody came up to me afterwards and was like, I loved your talk, thank you. They use the sandwich method, thank you for that. They said, it's not my preference, it's not just a preference that I'm with my husband. That's my sexual orientation. This is just how I am and who I am, and this is to whom I'm drawn. And you should in the future maybe consider putting orientation instead of preference, because it's not really affirming. I didn't even, because my life lens again is cis het, so I wasn't even thinking about that. But thank goodness, in our environments, we start off by kind of laying the groundwork that, look, we call each other out. Because I would rather you tell me than for me to repetitively keep saying something over and over again. So it's not to embarrass me or anything. I just need to do right by my patients, and I would rather you tell me. So I think that's, as a senior leaders should just show their clay feet. They should tell by how they're screwing up. And once you do that, people are like, well, if I'm attending, it's like when you say you don't know. Well, I don't know. That's a gap in my knowledge. When your attending has gaps in her knowledge, then you're like, oh, is this what we're doing? We're doing gaps in knowledge? Okay, let's do it. So I think that's a way to do it, to model it first.
We have another question here from Miles Akavis,
okay,
who asks, given the limited number of senior diverse faculty, how can junior diverse faculty find mentors to support their career development?
Your mentors are people that care about you, who have time, and who care about the things you care about. They do not have to have gender or racial concordance with you. That's the first thing I wish I had known when I was younger. I have 3 mentors right now. Miles, my 3 mentors, one is a Black woman who happens to work closely with me and to align with me in a lot of ways. She focuses with me on leadership and things related to my work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. My other mentor, and one of my mentors, is a white man. He's senior to me by about 12 years. He mentors me on my teaching. So when I meet with him, I specifically talk about my concerns around teaching and things I want to work on. And then my third mentor is a Mexican man who is an international medical graduate, but he is somebody who helps me with my scholarship. He's very prolific with getting stuff published. He can help me when something gets rejected, look at it and be like, you should have did this, you could do this. He is like reviewer too, but in my life every day. So I have learned that the best mentors are people that make time for you, that listen to you, that care about you, and that are trying to help you move to the next level. And they may not look just like you. So I would just say we have a lot of faculty that care a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion that you may not realize are great mentors. Furthermore, your peer mentors. My best mentors are usually peer mentors. So that picture I showed of Dr. Walker, she's a peer mentor. She's somebody that I could talk to about a lot of different things because we work in the same space. So don't underestimate the power of that either.
All right. I think those are most of the questions that I see in the chat box. Again, Dr. Manning, thank you so much for having, for taking the time to really address this challenging topic. We all make mistakes, like you said, and thank you for giving us some tools to help equip us and give us insight to how to address these really difficult situations. I'll now turn the floor over to Dr. Adam Thompson-Harvey, who will provide our closing remarks.
This is amazing. Dr. Manning, I really appreciate your thoughts, your advice, wisdom. I mean, initiatives that we can actually go to work tomorrow and actually implement. That's everything. Kind of thinking about everything that you just said, especially as it pertains to the culture that we have in academic medicine. I know some people had brought up earlier about what do you do when you have, attendings or people that are above you on kind of that hierarchy, and how do you respond to them? We talk about lifelong learning in academic medicine, but it almost seems as if there's like a ceiling in terms of like professional development, particularly when it comes to issues like these. And so I really appreciate you allowing, especially that we have a lot of residents and people that are medical students on the call who will then be, the next attendings and hopefully increase that 0.7% you brought up. But at least they're able to see ways that it can actually affect change and make this not a Black issue, LGBT issue, female issue, but that, this is something that matters for everyone in the health of all communities. And so now we actually have ways to empower ourselves and everyone else. So I really appreciate everything that you said, and we're going to keep moving forward. And so we have a webinar, and take this time to kind of shamelessly plug, but we're going to continue this webinar series in conjunction with GDI and the ORR subgroup on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the next webinar we'll have will be next month at the end of March. And it will be on the title, Managing Microaggressions in Medicine, Strategies to Identify, Address, and Regroup. And so we're going to continue to talk about how do we unpack microaggressions and respond to them. And so I think this, Dr. Manning, was the best way to kind of kick things off and keep things moving. I also want to give a few shout outs. So thank you, not only Dr. Manning, but Dr. Dale Hodge, Jennifer, Juan, Michelle on the call. All of you guys have really helped to make this an amazing webinar. I definitely have to give a big shout out to Eric Wilkerson. He's been directing and supporting the ORR, and it's been a huge proponent of us, and it helped us along the way. And I definitely have to give a shout out to a few of my colleagues. Dr. Richard Whitlock, he's the chair of ORR and has really pushed these DEI efforts from the ORR standpoint. And Dr. Versha Pleasant, she's a former GDI liaison and really helped get these initiatives going for this webinar we're on right now. And the rest of the subgroup committee members for the DEI and ORR. And this time I'll pass things over to Jennifer. But again, thanks everyone for attending this tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Please do give us your feedback on today's presentation by filling out the evaluation. You can find that right where you logged in today. We did record the session and we'll make it available within a week. You may access that archive by using the same login information you used to join tonight. You'll also receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. On behalf of the Association of American Medical Colleges, again, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and you may now disconnect.